Um, okay, so hi everyone. Welcome to the Zibby Mag online writing community. We're so excited today because we have our guest, Judy Mandel, with us. And Judy is a former reporter and marketing executive, and her New York Times bestseller was called Replacement Child. It's the story of her parents and her sister, that her parents and her sister unknowingly prepared her to write through letters and news clips pointing her to clues of their inner lives. Replacement Child was a #1 memoir in Amazon. It has won a bunch of awards and named Book of the Month by the Jewish Book Club. Her new book is called White Flag, and it's related to her first book because it really has echoes of transgenerational trauma stemming from family tragedy. So what we really wanted to talk about today is, sort of this idea of exploring family stories and how that can pose such a challenge for a lot of writers, I think, because, there's shame and there's guilt and is it okay for me to tell this story and all those things. So I'd love for you to sort of talk about, the beginning of all this with Replacement Child and how that kind of maybe prepared you for this next story that you wrote.
Sure.
And how you got to the place where you wanted to tell that first story.
Well, you know what? It's I think writing for me is more of a discovery of and I swore I would not quote Joan Didion like every writer in the world, but it really is true that I do write to find out, what I know and what I don't know and what how I feel about a certain thing. And I think there are different kinds of people. Some people never really examine this kind of thing in their life, but writers do. And I think that motivated me to in my first book, certainly to understand my childhood, to understand, this family tragedy, and to understand my role in the family. I mean, the interesting part I thought about writing Replacement Child was that I didn't know how I fit into it. I didn't even think it was my story. I thought it was my sister's story or my mother's story or my sister who was killed, her story. But it turned out it was my story and continued to be. And that was the discovery that, led me to really the title of the book, which I had no idea that there was this thing called Replacement Child Syndrome, which I now like to call a condition, not a syndrome. I say I'm a recovering replacement child is what that's what I say now. But that book was certainly, a way to understand, these relationships and, what they meant to my life. This next book, of course, dealt with my sister. My sister Linda was badly injured in that plane crash that's part of the Replacement Child story. And when she was 2 years old, she was very badly burned. And, her life was a struggle. She was in and out of hospitals her whole life. And of course, there's an effect on a younger sister and the whole family for, something that catastrophic happening. So this next book, White Flag, is about her daughter. And after my sister's death, I was looking out for her daughters. She had 2 daughters, and one of them is still fine and doing well. This daughter did unfortunately had substance use disorder. And so this is, my discovery of what was that and how did that happen, which life moves so fast. Sometimes you don't get a chance to say, well, what happened? And how did that happen? And why couldn't I help that situation? And what did I do? And what didn't I do? And also, understand the complexity of that.
I'm curious though, like when you first sat down to write these stories, was it always your intention that you were going to put it out there, or were you initially sitting down to sort of examine them and think about the way they, because I think when we're writing for our own healing or whatever you want to call it, it's a different process sometimes than when you think about writing for publication. It changes the way the story needs to
That's
be. So
absolutely, absolutely. With Replacement Child, I did set out to write, the book that I thought would be out there. That was my intention. And I think it was because my mother had always tried to write the story, and I felt like it was kind of my responsibility. I was the only one left. Everybody else was gone. And I felt like it was really up to me to do it. So that one I did definitely, look at what's the structure going to be, how can I best tell this story? How do I put those pieces together? For White Flag, I was not intending to write this as something that would go out there until I got more into the writing of it. And
Mhm.
and really, as I started to think about if this could actually help people understand better, then I decided that I needed to
Mhm.
do it.
So when you changed it from something you were sort of doing for your own, self to something that you thought, okay, now I want to put this out, what had to change about the story? How did what was sort of the process? Because I always think like the big thing is for the reader is, okay, there has to be a takeaway for them. There has to be something, so, and then that can kind of like dictate
Right,
what, the course of the story. So
right.
was that, were you just kind of like writing whatever was coming to your mind, and then once you decided, you wanted to put it out, then it was a more structured process, or
Well, I started with a piece that wound up in the middle of the book. And
Mm,
I thought it was really just something I needed to write about when I got a phone call about my niece. And so that was a piece I just felt like I needed to write it. When I started getting all of like what I called in that essay, I called the evidence, collecting the evidence, and putting together those notes, the story started to take shape almost, by itself. And,
mhm.
and like you said, knowing what a purpose was to a takeaway for the reader. And I think there is, definite takeaways from this book that I'm hoping that I hope will help people have a new perspective.
Yeah, I mean, it does, in your essay, you did talk about the fact that it wasn't necessarily an enjoyable experience at all to write
No.
this. It was challenging. So how did you motivate yourself to sit down and keep at it? Because I mean,
Yeah,
writing a memoir, writing a book is such a big commitment.
yeah,
You could have done it in essays or smaller bits.
yeah.
Did you do essays while you were doing the book as well, or
No, I
smaller
didn't. I
pieces?
didn't write much while I was writing this book, um, and I'd finished it before the pandemic, so there was that. So then I was trying to figure out what to do, after that. No, I didn't do any other writing, and actually, I couldn't even write this piece for a long time. It was, and you're right. It's not. I don't know. Is writing fun? I'm not sure it's fun at all. I think. Does anybody think it's fun? I think it's fulfilling and
Yeah.
it's rewarding. Um, and but I think for the most part, it's painful to write. I love
No.
having written something, but I do love being in the process, in the project, in the middle of it. Even
Well,
if
I don't,
it's not fun.
yeah, I think, and I do think there's a certain something with memoir and personal essay that, I mean, this is maybe just my own experience, but I feel like a lot of times something it transfers over to like, getting like, excuse me, but like vomiting the story out. And
Mhm.
then kind of it starts to take shape in like you're looking at it as a writer and not, as much
Right.
the personal side of it, but like, okay, am I doing the best job I can? Am I telling the story in the best way I can? Because if you're going to write the darn thing, then you want to do it in a way that it's really going to connect with people and work, so
Absolutely.
um
Yeah.
I know what you're saying, but and then I mean, it sounds like both of these books required a lot of research and sort of you, like, for lack of a better, like, private investigator almost, like I think you said something like about that in the
Yeah.
essay. And, you know, I know there was parts of it where you talked about talking to other people to see if you were remembering it the same way as them. And I just know from talking to people in the writing community that that's something that a lot of people have struggled with, is when
Yeah.
you're telling a family story and you're the writer, you know, you're kind of telling it from your perspective. So how important did you feel that was to get
And you
other?
have to, that's all you have is your perspective. And, you know, it's understandable if you, I mean, if you talk to siblings in a family, they'll tell you completely different stories about what their, you know, family life was like. I mean, I remember my sister was alive when Replacement Child was written. And, you know, I let her read it before it came out. And she said, Dad wasn't like that. You know,
Maybe not
so
to you.
you know, you
Yeah.
can you can grow up in the same family and have a completely different experience. So, you know, if
So
that's the
what would be
case,
your advice? I'm sorry, what would be your advice if someone, you know, do you feel then that, you know, okay, then this is my perspective, and if you want yours, then you should write your own book? Or do you think it's important to take both of those things into account?
well,
Was that,
I think it's a, you know, I didn't want that book to come out without my sister reading it. So because that was important to me. Um, and I actually told her, I said, if there's anything in here that is hurtful to you, I will take it out. And because that part was more important to me than a book.
Mhm,
Um, in some cases, that's not possible, of
mhm,
course. Um, especially if people are not alive anymore. That's absolutely not possible. Um, but I think it is important to tell your story from your perspective. And
mhm,
that's, and memoir writers, you know, have that unique, you know, issue, problem, whatever you want to call it, is that somebody else is going to disagree with you. They're just going to. It's there's no way to get around it. And I think you just have to plunge through, you know, just forge through what your perspective is and how you felt and what it was to you. That's what I think.
yeah, I mean, I guess that's part of it, right? Is always going back to that, well, you know, like your feelings and your experience, because that's, you know, if you're keeping to that perspective, then
Right. You're not reporting on something, real, you know, you're not a reporter in that
Mhm.
sense. You're not, you know, you don't have to look at the facts and make sure everybody agrees with them. It's it's yours. It's yours.
So something that I feel like a lot of people run into when they write these kind of stories, especially with memoir, and I'm curious from your experience, is quotes and dialogue and feeling comfortable with having dialogue or quotes in the piece.
Mhm.
Given that, you know, basically what we just talked about, which is that we're not tape recorders, so we don't remember word for word everything that was said, but you're trying to, you know,
Right.
use to not just have the whole thing be narrative, right?
Right.
So,
Right.
so
Right.
what would be your thoughts on that?
I think if you get the idea and the feeling of what somebody said and you're not misquoting them intentionally, but you're getting across what you know, what their message was in that quote, I think you're good. I don't think you have to be, you know, a recording machine. I mean, in my case, I had actual letters back and forth from Cheryl and I, excuse me, and so I did have her words in that way.
Mhm.
You know, I went back, I looked at her Facebook posts, and I had, you know, things that were definitely from her that I could point to. As far as and texts, I used texts that we had gone back and forth with, which were written. So I didn't have any, you know, misgivings about, you know, did she really say that or did she, you know, that not say that, because I knew that she had. Um,
Mhm.
so I think in memoir, I mean, trying to be as um, truthful and factual as you can. But if you know you had a conversation and you know this is the gist of what happened in it, I think you're okay with it.
Yeah, no, I just think it's good for people to hear from someone that writes memoir, because I
Right.
feel like it's something that people struggle with when they first start writing this kind of
Sure,
stuff.
sure.
And just feeling, that nervousness that what if I get like, I'm trying to get the best, the closest as I can, but what if I get it, wrong, like a little bit wrong, and someone comes
Yeah,
back and says,
yeah.
oh, wait, that's not the way I remember that.
I'll tell you, with White Flag, the biggest issue and worry that I had was about Cheryl's sister, because
Mm.
we had a falling out. When this happens a lot, when people die, we hadn't spoken in a couple of years. And as I wrote the book, we weren't speaking. And I knew she was angry with me about some things with her father. And I couldn't check with her, is what I'm trying to say. So, gratefully, we, amended our, relationship right before this book came out. And I was able to send it to her, before it did come out and before it was published, which I'm glad about. She didn't
Yeah.
agree with everything, which I didn't expect that she would. So there were things in it that she said, well, that wasn't right, but she was okay. And we made it all right. But I know a lot of people do worry about that with their family members. Are they going to be all right with this? And that's something that they have to juggle and see how they feel about it themselves. It's so personal. It's so personal.
And then I'd love for you to talk about the idea of, I think you sort of alluded to it before, but this, how did this process kind of allow you to examine the experience and feel maybe differently about it than you did when you set out to write it? Because I do think, you were talking about, us writers, it's like, this is how we kind of take in the world in a lot of ways and how we examine it. And
Yeah.
I often feel like when I do something, I don't always know what the takeaway is going to be. Like, and sometimes I'm learning the growth point or whatever you want to say as I'm writing, because I'm like, wait, how did this affect us or
Yeah.
me, or,
I think that's true. I think that's very true. Is how, that you do find it out as you're writing it. I mean, there were so many things I found out while I was researching this book that were surprises to me. There were even secrets in my family that I didn't know about, that came out. And so you do change your perspective. You do change how you feel about things. The more I learned about substance use disorder, the more I was in tune with my niece and what she went through, and understood more about what she went through. It's very easy to write off people that have substance use disorder. It's very easy to, and you notice I don't use the word addiction. I try not to use the word addiction because it's such a loaded word with stigma. And I think, even just changing some of that language helps you humanize people. And that was one of the big things that changed for me, was understanding kind of this community and what they need and where they came from, and the complexity of what went into it in their lives.
Yeah, I mean, what a gift to have someone like you tell the story, because I think that's, what we need is sometimes people, if like they always say, if you're able to put into words what someone else has felt but hasn't been able to, sort of capture as a writer, I think what a gift for other people to be able to either see themselves or their stories in it, or to, learn something that they didn't know and all that. So what do you feel like? I mean, I know you talked about really the catalyst for writing this was to put sort of to teach people, or it wasn't just for you to get it out, but for people to be able to read about it and learn about it, or feel that they were seen and all those things. So now that you've done it, how do you feel about that, that aspect of hearing from people that maybe have connected with it, or maybe opening people's eyes to different perspective on it?
Sure. The different parts of it, I've had different feedback. The generational trauma piece is something that, elicits a lot of comment, that people don't realize how trauma trickles down through generations. And that was one of the big pieces that I came away from, from doing the research for this book. So not just for my niece, but for my whole family and for many people's families. You know, I don't know if you do, I don't know if there can be, you know, a family that has had no trauma in their, you know, generations. But to understand how that can, you know, affect, you know, the coming generations, I think is an important piece. Understanding mental health and how undiagnosed mental health issues can definitely impact substance use disorder. You know, that my niece had undiagnosed depression that I believe she was self-medicating for. And, you know, those pieces, a lot of people had come to me and said, you know, I totally understand this now in a different way, you know, how it affected my family and, you know, in certain ways. Brain chemistry is another, you know, another piece that I did a lot of research about for the book, and, you know, how brain chemistry changes when, you know, with the use of certain drugs, and how that can get in your way of recovery. So there's all these, you know, tentacles is what I think of that that kind of coalesce and for many people. And I it's not just me. It's not just, you know, my situation. It's certainly many people.
So interesting. I'm going to open it up to anybody. So if you guys want to start raising your hands or letting me know if you want to ask questions or make a comment or anything, please do. See, Daphne, I can always count on Daphne to ask a good question or say something.
So thank you for this essay. I'm going to be honest, I haven't read your books, but will. And I also want to, before my question, when I read the essay, I was so pleased to see that you referred, as you mentioned, to substance use disorder rather than addiction, because, you know, people who use drugs are such pariahs in our society. And, you know, it's very hard for them, for people to accept and understand and help them because of that. In fact, I don't know if you saw, you might have, and it's so relevant, 2 weeks ago, the New York Times, their whole opinion section was about this very topic. It was all about people who use drugs in this effort to create safe spaces so their lives can be saved. Counseling. And anyway, so it fit right into that. But my question is about the generational trauma. It's always intrigued me, especially since, you know, when I went back to Greece, I wrote an essay about this, and I connected with family I didn't even know that I had. And I felt so much of them. And I started to do some research into generations of people who were not alive, who I never intersected with. You know,
I'm gonna mute.
Yeah.
Everyone. Sorry.
Okay.
I think I got it. Go ahead, Daphne.
So I started to do some research into members of my family who were generations before those who I knew. And when I did the research and found out things about their immigration stories and when they got here, and I'm saying that's a trauma that they experienced. And I saw versions of that in the people that I knew who were alive.
It's amazing, isn't it? It's incredible.
So I'm wondering if your research included people who were not alive, that you never intersected with. I mean,
oh yeah, absolutely.
Generations ago.
I mean, a lot of the research that I looked up was related to the Holocaust and generations of you know, past generations from the Holocaust, and how it really did impact future generations. That was the most documented research that I could find about generational or transgenerational trauma. There's a woman, her name is Rachel Yehuda, who I think she's still at Mount Sinai doing this kind of research also into, she's published a number of pieces about generational trauma, and mostly to do with generations from the Holocaust. And it's clear, it's really clear that this type of trauma and the type you're talking about visits the next generation in certain ways, whether it's, there's actually epigenetics that you might want to look into, that is something that's carried on chemically, through generations. And it's not just genes, but it's the way hormones react on the genes that is carried through to the next generation, which is, first of all, amazing, and also explains so much to me. It's a topic I'm really not qualified to talk about, I just want to tell you, but I have done, quite a bit of research into it, and some of the research is fascinating. So you're right. You're right.
Yeah, it certainly has helped me, and obviously you. That's why the question, to thread certain needles, in terms of, generations that I knew. Anyway, people that I knew. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you. Thanks for bringing that up. It's a really fascinating topic for me.
Hi, Shelley. Go ahead.
Hello, everybody.
Hi.
Judy, thank you so much. And I do intend to read your book. And I think for me, I am a recovering alcoholic. I've been sober for 6 years. I'm out and I'm proud about it.
Great. Fantastic.
And I think what's really great about your book is that what's necessary is for people to understand the collateral damage that's done in families. I mean, I think it's coming from both. I think that the generational trauma, which is something that I'm experiencing, that I've experienced. I'm a double winner. I've got the alcoholism and I'm also a survivor of sexual abuse. Mm-hmm. And what I'm writing about is actually really joyful. And I was born with one hand. But what I'm writing about is how that combination of experiences has shaped my worldview and is shaping me. And so it's a much more positive thing. I'm not focusing too much on the recovery, but what I'm really interested in is, today I'm writing about my mother. So that ought to take about 5 minutes and then I'll be out. But it's a long day. I don't want to, she's gone, and I don't want to throw her under the bus in terms, she's not here to defend herself, and I don't want to, I'm trying to celebrate her for all the good things that she did, but the looking the other way during the sexual abuse was really huge, and it's really important for me to be able to talk about it. Yeah. So I think it's what Darcy was saying earlier about you're writing about our experiences, even though there are different people, what happened to me, what I experienced, how that's what shaped me. So I feel confident that I can write about that as long as I'm not throwing other people, I'm not people who can't defend themselves, or as long as I'm being responsible about the other people in the story. I do have to include them on some level, but I'm going to try and keep it more general. Yeah. But really, I'm rambling. I really wanted to say that there is such a place for the collateral damage, and this, I think it's helpful for everybody.
Well, let me just say that, you said throwing them under the bus. I understand what you're saying. I mean, in my first book, Replacement Child, I had to deal with my father, who I realized through my writing was neglectful and emotionally distant and hurt me in many ways. So I had to be truthful about that because it was such a big part of the story. I couldn't, and I loved my father. He was in many ways a wonderful person, wonderful father. But to me, he wasn't in what I needed, and it was hurtful for my life. So I had to tell that story. And I think you do too. You have to do it. You have to. You got to do it. You have, because you can't tell that in a general way.
You're right.
You can't. So that's my sermon for you for today.
I needed to hear it. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, I think there's a difference too between telling it in a way that feels angry or, resentful versus just telling it observationally, like this is what happened. And if you're telling it good enough, then you'll bring the reader maybe to the feelings that you felt, but you're not telling them that they should feel the same way. I don't know. That's just my 2 cents.
Well, the scenes that you pick will show it.
Yeah. And then that's the other thing. You can write the scenes, and if you're like, I'm really not comfortable with this one, then pick a different one. I don't know. But Heidi, go ahead.
Well, just one quick question first. That last question totally set me up for what I wanted to ask about. When your story came out, was your father alive or dead?
Both my parents were dead.
Okay.
at
And
that
then,
time.
but that's, but then the other question too leads up what we were just talking about. How did you deal with, because I'm hearing too, the idea of the anger that comes out sometimes of when things weren't. And like, how do you deal with that anger in your writing so you don't come across as like a Fox News commentator throughout the whole thing? I mean, that's, how do you address that anger? Because it's there, but you can't make the whole thing about the anger.
Yeah, you have to take the anger out of it. I think you really do. You have to be dispassionately almost outside yourself. And because the anger is not going to tell your story the way you want to. And your readers won't listen anymore once they get to that. So I think you're right. I think, the anger has to be separate. And maybe you have to write it a few times to get the anger out. Write it with the anger and go back and say, okay, what's charged in this piece that I need to take out? And sometimes it will take, I know I had to do that, especially with Replacement Child. I had to go back and look at those pieces about my father, because I after writing for a year, I got angry at him. And then it started to come through in the writing, and I didn't want it to. And it's a turnoff for readers.
Yeah.
So you're right. You're absolutely right.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that.
Sure.
Esther?
Hi, lower my hand first of all. There we go. All right. So my parents were Holocaust survivors from Poland, and I was born in Germany. And I wrote a novelized version of my family story, which was published in 2003. And unbelievably to me, in the 20 years since then, I've learned a lot more, including the things that I had wrong. And I'm sorry, my phone's ringing, but my husband should pick it up. Oh, I'm going to decline that. There we go. Anyway, so what my question is actually, and I really appreciate having this kind of forum. I'm rereading my book from 2003, first of all, which I haven't read since then, and I'm amazed at how vulnerable I made myself as I was writing it. Okay, one of the things that has happened in the 20 years since it was published was that I used the real names of where my parents came from, and my mother's village in Poland contacted me to find out what happened to the Jews from the village. And this turned out to be quite an experience, because among other things, they sent me my mother's school enrollment papers and so on. So it was quite a thing. It's a part, not the only thing that's happened in the 20 years. So I don't know if I want to have a hybrid memoir novel. Does that exist? How do you work with the old material and put in the new material? So it's, I guess, a technical question.
Yeah, why would you make it a hybrid? Why would you novelize it? I guess, what's your idea about why you would
continue to novel? Because I'd like to, I guess I've been writing some essays about the factual things that have happened since then, and those are factual. The stuff was factual that I wrote before, but I didn't use the same timeline of my life, and I didn't use my maiden name, and that kind of thing. So that's why I considered it novel. And Queen Esther is a character, which is yet another factor of it that is novel, because that really wasn't true. So, but the things that have happened since, like my mother's village contacting me, I've had relatives I didn't know contact me, and finding out also new things about things my family did when I was quite young that I had not known. For one thing, I didn't realize that my parents, when we had just about no money, used the little money we had to sponsor other refugees. And this is news to me that, again, is fairly recent. So yeah, I'm not sure exactly how to put those things together, the story that I wrote then and the things that have happened since.
Yeah.
But
I always think truth is fascinating to me. I guess that's why I write memoir. But it just seems to me that you've got a lot of material there that's, you know,
Yeah.
that's real material. And I'm not sure why you would want to fictionalize it, but if you want to tell
Okay.
a different story and use pieces of it, you could certainly do that. But just the things that you've just said, for, you know, the real things that have happened are fascinating. And I would be interested in reading about that. So that's what I think.
I guess I could even do it as part 1 and part 2, the book that was published in 2003,
Sure.
and then the facts that I've
Follow
learned
up.
in the past.
Follow up.
So it would be, again, kind of hybrid.
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like there's so
Thank
many
you.
different ways you could go with that, because when you're talking about generational trauma and all that, I'm like, okay, but what about Esther telling it from like the perspective of her and who she is, and how all this other, you know, information and family history affected you as a person and who you are now, you know, I don't know. I mean, there's so many different.
Yeah, and I mean,
Yeah.
part of what's amazing to me, because as you can tell, I'm not young, but I'm still learning new information even at this point in my life, which is kind of staggering, actually.
That's great. It's a great thing.
Thank you.
Thanks for that. Thank you.
That's the beauty. I always think of writing. Like I feel like I met someone a couple weeks ago who was like 93, 95, something, you know, and she had just put out a self-published book of poetry, and she was so excited about it, and it was beautiful. And I was like, you know, like
That's
that's
fantastic.
awesome.
Yeah, that is
Yeah.
fantastic. It's wonderful.
Stephanie.
Hello. First of all, I want to thank you for having me on. I haven't been able to join any of your meetings up until today because it's coincided with my schedule. But Judy, I saw that you were coming on. I was like, oh my gosh, I so want to meet her. I have read your work
wow.
and I loved it.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much.
I could talk about intergenerational trauma and alcoholism and all that, but I won't. I have a couple questions for you. As someone who's been a ghostwriter for a long time and is getting ready to publish a memoir under my own name, I've been kind of picky about having too many cooks in the kitchen as far as mentors, and getting too much, you know, like workshopping it too much and having too much feedback. So my questions for you is like, how many people did you work with and have them really kind of go back and forth? And I have, you know, a writer's group, and then I have a few mentors, but I'd love to know a little bit about how many people you bounced ideas off of, and how many I'm on my 8th draft and I think I'm about done, but how many drafts about in this last piece did you do before you were happy with like, okay, I think this is good, and your editor and your agent were like, yeah, all right.
These are good questions. I had about 13 different drafts of this book, and I would say half of them were in a completely different structure. So
Right.
I changed the format and everything. So there were a lot of drafts. I had really one person that was very seriously helping me form this, who was a teacher of mine and a friend. So it was one person. I also, strangely, my son is a really good editor and he also knows the family. So he was actually the first one who read it and went
that's
through
awesome.
it and helped me dive into things that I was afraid to dive into. And I'm so grateful that, you know, I birthed my own little editor. Was really great. And then I had another author, Richard Russo, actually, who I took a class with, and he very generously also read the book and gave me some great comments and was very, very helpful to me. So
Wonderful.
so I guess that basically three
Yeah.
would be it. I think you're absolutely right. You can get too many comments. Everybody's got their own perspective. This is, you know, when I went for my MFA really late in life, you know, I also found, you know, in workshops, sometimes there was too much.
Yeah.
And sometimes half of it was completely off base. So it's almost dangerous, you know, when you're really deeply into your book,
Yeah.
to get too much of that. I think you're right. I think you're right that way. I don't know.
Thank
Did
you
that
so
answer?
much.
Did I
It
answer?
totally, yes,
Yeah.
it totally did. Thank you
Thank you for
so
thank you for
much.
reading my books. I appreciate
Yes.
it. Thank you very much.
Francine?
I'll be quick because I know we're short on time, but thank you, Judy, for coming today. And I have not read your books, but I certainly will. I
Thanks.
just have to say that I'm so grateful that we've changed the dialogue about addiction, from addiction to substance use disorder. I've been through, excuse my language, but a hell of a time with the daughter through addiction. She's been in long-term recovery since 2009.
Oh, good.
So I could tell you stories about all of that. And as she so still to this day says, nobody ever chooses to become an alcoholic or an addict, ever. She's actually writing her own story now too, which I'm happy about. But I've already written down both of your books. I cannot wait to read them. Thank you for your time. And I appreciate you being here and saying so much about addiction, because the other thing I want to point out is collateral damage in a family, when all of that, it takes years to heal, move forward, and be okay. And if you don't get proper counseling, you will never be okay. That's my opinion. Just my opinion. Not, you
You're
know,
right.
you know,
You're
because
right on.
we've all here had a lot. Well, my husband said the least, because, you know, he's a lawyer, so he knows everything about it. He didn't need as much counseling as I obviously did. So, but we're still together. We've come out on the other side much better, happy, healthy, thankful, grateful every
Good.
day. That's the most important thing. So anyway, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for, and you know, it's great to hear about your daughter. That's
Yeah,
wonderful.
well,
Wonderful.
I know how blessed I am, and I know that I'm the lucky one, because I have friends that were not lucky. So
Right,
I almost didn't talk today because I knew I would start crying, because I always do.
I
But
know,
you know,
fine.
that's tears of joy and gratitude. You know, just that's all.
Well, thank you. Thank you.
Kara, I'm going to put, here you go, Kara.
Judy, thank you for being on. Do you do any speaking to publicly about substance abuse and coping with that and sharing your story as a supportive person? And I'm asking because professionally, aside from writing, and I have a memoir coming out soon, I do strategic communications for organizations, and one of them is the DMHA, Department of Mental Health and Addiction.
I have been looking to do more of that. Up till now, it's only been in relation to my book, White Flag.
Mm-hmm.
But it has been for, you know, certain organizations. But I would love to do more of that.
Okay. Well, maybe Darcy can connect us.
Yes, please, please. I would love to do that.
Or you don't have to. I'll DM you my email. Leave Darcy out of it. And then my second question. So aside from that, business over with. I wanted to find out if you had considered, as you're sharing a story, because I know when I was approaching my memoir, I was quasi terrified of writing it and thought, you know what, maybe I could write about it in third person. And I approached it that way first because I've written thousands of personal interest stories. So my job has been making others look good. I've never written about myself until I realized I had to. And I was in a writing group, and my friend who was leading the group said, "Where's your story?" I was like, "Oh, no. I don't write about myself." But it really coincides with the inspiration for my memoir. So I did, but I did it first in third person. So can you address like how you approach that, or if anyone's being hesitant in sharing their story? That, you know, to me, that was an icebreaker. So I just want to hear what you have to say about that.
I had a similar experience with writing my first book, with writing Replacement Child. Because I thought it was not my story. So I went up, the approach was the same as yours. I wrote it in third person, and I kept trying to write it in third person and trying to write it in third person. And I was in a writer's group at that point too. And finally they said, where are you in this story? And it's almost exactly what you're saying. When I realized that, it was a game changer and changed the whole idea of the book. So yeah, I think sometimes you just have to do it. If it's yours, it's yours. So you're right.
Yeah. Well, thank
Right.
you. I just think maybe it's a natural path, and that,
It might
these-
be, that you
these,
have to distance yourself first, and then you realize, oh, I'm really inside this story, and it needs to come from me. It needs
I
my
think people
voice.
do that all the time. They do. It's like, especially with family stories, when I hear
Yeah.
people share them, it's like they'll tell the whole thing about everything that's going on. And then you're
Yeah.
like, but wait, there's one thing missing. Like, where are you?
Yeah.
And what you're feeling during this moment, and they're like, oh, yeah.
Yeah.
But it's a progression. Like maybe it takes, a couple drafts to get there.
Yeah. Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
Hi, Deborah.
Hi. Hi, Judy. Thank you so much for being here.
Hi.
I look forward to reading your books. I'm curious about something you wrote in your essay about how you talked with those who are dead, and especially you talked with those who are dead. And I'm curious how you did that. And I ask because I am also working on a memoir. And both my brother and my father have died, and I feel them still a part of my life. So I'm just curious, like what that was for you, and was it something that you were able to connect with those people, or you used some sort of a conduit to help you connect with them?
Well, it's I think because I knew these people so well, I would always know what their reaction would be to certain things. And, as different things came out that I didn't know about until I started writing this. I, especially my sister, there were things that she didn't tell me that, I would actually yell at her, even though she's gone, and say, you have a lot of nerve, doing this to me. And leaving me here to solve this with your daughter. How could you do that? So I did, I think, talk to them a lot. My mother especially, I certainly knew what her attitude was to everything. I know, first of all, I know she would hate the title of my first book, Replacement Child. She would have argued with me till the end of Earth that, you weren't a replacement child. That's, ridiculous. But it didn't change the truth of it, even though that she would argue with me. I didn't have, so to your question, I didn't have any kind of conduit. I think I've always just felt they're still kind of here with me.
Yeah.
Maybe that's a little too spiritual for some people, but
I'm with you.
but I do feel that way. And sometimes I'll have a dream, and they'll be there, and I'll know how they felt. And maybe it's the same for you.
Yeah.
Maybe it's the same for you.
Yeah, it's beautiful that you have that connection. Thank
Yeah.
you, Judy.
It's good. Even my father, who I was so angry with, sometimes, he'll pop up and I'll have a memory that will soften everything for me. And, it's nice too.
Yeah.
It's nice too.
Thank you.
So best of luck. That sounds great that you're doing that.
Thank you.
Sure.
Okay, so does anyone else have any comments or questions? If not, I think we talked a little bit before everybody was on, and I just, is there anything you're working on now? Is there anything, coming up that people can look for? Or
I'm working on the audiobook for White Flag. So I'm hoping that that'll be, it takes a long time. I just have to say, the audiobook thing is harder than I thought it would be. but I'm hoping in the next month or so I'll be able to get that, out there. And I'm always tinkering with small writing pieces, diving into another book I'm not sure about. As you said, it's big. It's a big endeavor to write a book. So yeah, that's all I'm doing right now is getting that audiobook done. So,
Yeah. How does that feel, because you're so close to the story?
mhm.
I imagine that there might be certain parts of it that must be challenging, like not to be emotional or.
Yeah, no, it's hard. I have to do it in pieces, just like I had to do the writing, because when you're in it again, you're right, the emotions are back, and it can, you're right there again. So I do take it in pieces. That's
Yeah, I think that's such an interesting, because I always see that, like, and if there are like classes or workshops and people share, sometimes they can write it, but then when they're reading it out loud, they're like, I can't believe I'm getting emotional. This happened 20 years ago. Why am I reacting this way?
Right.
And you're like,
Yeah.
but there is something very different about saying it out loud, and sort of.
And I had to get over that doing readings, for the book. When there's certain chapters I can't read out loud. There's certain pieces I can't do it. So I won't. But I did get over that a little bit by doing those readings. It helps. The more you do it, the easier it is, I think.
Yeah. Well, I'm so grateful to you for sharing this with us. This was wonderful. Like, just so much
great
information, and we really appreciate it. And obviously I'm gonna, so tomorrow the recording will go out, and I'll make sure to include your Instagram. So if anybody wants to connect with you, I hope that's okay. If they have any,
Anybody wants to connect with me, please do.
And spread the word about her book, and
Thank you.
what a great chat we had. So
Thank you.
I'm going to put the view on galleries, and usually by now, okay, good. Sometimes I put the view on gallery, and then like half the people don't have their video on, and I'm always like, oh no, I want to see everybody's faces. So anyway, thank you so much again, and thanks everybody for coming, and I hope you all have a good week.
Yeah, thank you all. Thank you all.
Thank you,
Thanks.
Judy.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.